Bring us the girl and wipe away the debt.
I think there's sort of two ways to look at this. One is you sit down and play it, and I think you'd be hard-pressed to say it's not a Bioshock game, or it doesn't feel like a Bioshock game. I mean, we sort of had to sit down and figure out after Bioshock, what is a Bioshock game? You know, it's not, we didn't think it was just Rapture, you know, we thought it was something else. And what they all sort of share is a sense of this rich world to explore, this incredibly detailed world that you can just explore every nook and cranny and find a space that feels genuine and consistent. And also the sort of improvisational nature of combat. You had a lot of sort of choice about how you approach combats and how you dealt with that situation. You know, and the tool set you have was fairly expansive. You had a fair amount of control over it. When we started Infinite, it was basically up for grabs. Nothing was a sacred cow besides those two things. But, you know, as we developed the stories, you know, it is the same people working on it, and we have this, and we pursue, you know, we have a set of interests, and I think we're all interested in sort of utopian structures, and we're all interested in, you know, how technology and society sort of fit together and how they impact one another. And so we sort of come back to thematic structures that exist between the games, and, you know, like that there's a city and that there's this, you know, this sort of charismatic figure, and he's got a very particular view of the world. But they're quite different. Andrew Ryan and Comstock, who's the sort of the leader of this city, who is a religious prophet, a prophetic figure. In some ways, they're also very similar in the sense that they have a particular view of the world, and if you don't fit in that view, they don't have any time for you, and they don't accept you. The other theme that we really try to work with is just selling the world, you know, in the detail, in the small details of it, rather than telling you what the world is, just showing you at every moment what the world is. And it's quite an intensive, labor-intensive task, but it's something that I think is really important. A lot of people would come to me and say, Ken, tell me the whole story. Like, I want to hear the whole story. And I'm like, that's not how, I can't do it that way. Like, it doesn't have any meaning if I tell you. It's because the words don't matter. In the same way when sometimes designers come in to me and they say, okay, this is what the player is going to feel here. And I said, well, don't tell me what the player is going to feel. All we have are pixels and sounds, right? That's it. And maybe some vibration on the stick. That's all we have. Tell me what your pixels and sounds are going to be like and how the stick's going to vibrate, and I'll tell you what I feel. And, you know, and they have to pitch it from that angle rather than from the, you know, from the inside of the head. And you're trying to get an emotion, you're trying to get a feeling, but you can't just dictate that to the player. We had done 2 games with silent protagonists, you know, 2 games of this style with silent protagonists, and we sort of said, well, we really can't play that card again. And that, what did that mean for us? That we said, well, we have this person, and when you play a game like Uncharted or something, you see that's Nathan Drake, and you're like, oh, that's Nathan Drake, and I'm here, and I'm controlling Nathan Drake, and that relationship is really clear. That's comforting in a lot of ways. Where with Booker, you sort of share a skin with him, and, you know, and because the game doesn't ship with the autobiography of Booker DeWitt, you know, there's a revelatory notion in the game of how you sort of learn about him, and, you know, there are things in the world you encounter that you're probably surprised, you know, his relationship to them. That to me is an interesting place for the player to be, but it's also, you have to be very, very careful, because, like, for instance, giving Booker a lot of relevant knowledge about something that the player feels he should know, the player should know, but Booker's keeping it from him, would alienate the player from Booker. But also, you know, just sort of sitting there and explaining every detail about the guy is also not interesting as well, you know, because you're in this weird place. And then you have this relationship with this woman, you know, this AI, but this woman, and that he has and that you also have, you know, in this sort of shared experience. It's sort of like, I guess in Game of Thrones, they have these skin changers, I think they're called. You know, people sort of can take other people's bodies, and there's this weird sharing that happens, and you have that feeling with Booker. And that was an experiment we really wanted to take on, and it's pretty, that enables a relationship with Elizabeth that we just couldn't have if you were a silent protagonist. My relationship with Courtney and Troy, played Elizabeth and Booker, was, I think, central to my experience on this game. That, you know, and Troy is such an experienced voice actor and is a gamer, a hardcore gamer, and Courtney just has these instincts which are insanely keen about character. And generally, if a scene wasn't working, it wasn't sort of about me beating them up around the actor tree. It was about us finding another way to approach a scene and them helping me. They were definitely my collaborators in a lot of ways in these two characters. The bigger design challenge is the scale of the space was a bit of a technical challenge, the verticality and getting the skylines to feel right, that was definitely a challenge. We showed this thing at E3 last year and people were like, no way, that's a scripted, there's no way that could ever be real. They're never gonna be able to deliver on something like that. And the reason we sort of started with that thing tonight, the demonstration we showed you, is like to say, here it is, you wanna play it? And because, when you get into that kind of shooter, that kind of verticality, there's all these constraints you deal with, like how much information can the player handle? How much do players look up, especially with a controller sometimes, PC is a little different. When you're moving that fast, how does that affect your FOV and, things like that, all these really boring sort of very game developer questions. The floating worlds, those are a fairly complex piece of technology because that's just, the Unreal Engine does not do that off the shelf by any stretch of the imagination. It's sort of what it doesn't do, one of the things it doesn't do. For me, the challenges that this game introduced were having the world not be dead, and having there being people around and living there, doing their, existing in the space, and either be in a situation where it's completely peaceful or there could be combat going on, and what does that mean, and how do you get into that, and how do you get out of that, and how do you make it not look like these edge cases where things end up looking really stupid, because it's much simpler when everybody was either an enemy or a corpse in Bioshock 1 and System Shock. That made our job a lot easier. And also you're with this woman all the time, with Elizabeth, and what's she doing in those things? How does she react in the space? Because, you don't want that traditional problem. If Elizabeth was going to be successful, she couldn't be the traditional NPC, who just sort of stands there like this. Right. She had to live in that space, and you had to believe that she was existing in that space and interacting with that space and observing that space and having a reaction to that space, having a reaction to you and what you did. Like, I'll be honest with you, early on in the game, I'd be in level reviews and I'd say, okay, designer repitching a level. And this happened in Bioshock 1 too with the Big Daddies. And I'd say, okay, well, where's Elizabeth? What's she doing in this moment? And you're like, oh, you left her in the closet, like back there, because people were terrified of her because the challenge. And trust me, Bioshock 1 Big Daddy was the same thing. Nobody really understood how he worked, so people were terrified of him. And a lot of people wanted to cut him for a long time. And frankly, there was a lot of times that people were like, we should just cut Elizabeth, because they understood, quite rightfully, that this was a massive undertaking. Bioshock Infinite doesn't exist without this character. Let alone the gameplay, the story. So it's a story of these two people and their journey through this dramatic landscape. It's really a story of these two people and how they change each other and what they mean to each other. And how their lives change because of each other. And without her, there's no. She's the soul of the game. And so we had to treat her with that respect and give her that attention. But it took a village to build her. She was a complicated thing. But the testament to that is I remember I was watching a scene a couple of weeks ago, and for a minute I was like, oh my God, yeah, that's Courtney's voice, and we have an actress who did the motion capture, and that's the other actress's motion capture, and it's this guy's character model and my writing and it's all these things coming together. There is no that she doesn't actually exist. I kind of lost track of that for a while. Not because I'm not saying that this game is like a perfect replica of human existence. I'm saying we spent so much time with her and thought so much about her that the lines got a little blurry. I think we all kind of fell in love with her.